We're going to start today's class by saying thank you to Hakadosh Baruch Hu for this beautiful miracle, this miracle of protecting Am Yisrael through this barrage from Iran. Yemach Shema, Hakadosh Baruch Hu should see Kacha Yobedu Kol Ovecha Amonai. Just like we began, Hashem should finish the job. And please Hashem please should continue to show us His incredible mercy and guidance through this time, and we should be zocheh to see this be the onset of the coming of Mashiach Meirav Yameinu. Amen. Let's begin. The Mishnah says as follows: HaKoreach korcha berosho. If a person winds up pulling out hair or cutting out hair on his head, and this is specifically, as we said, not because someone thinks bald is the new hair, but rather because of someone passes away. And we mentioned that the reason why the Torah said that was asur is because it illustrates that the person it's such a final thing for him, this death, that he's mourning excessively to the point where he's pulling or ripping hair out, okay? So the Torah says that that's forbidden. The Mishnah over here is telling us, HaKoreach korcha berosho, if he does that, or v'hamekif pa'at rosho, if someone shaves off the peot of his head, okay? V'hamashchit pe'at zikno, or destroys the pe'at, the sides of his beard. V'asoret srita achat al hamet, or if a person cuts himself, tears his flesh also in mourning, chayav, that person has a isur and a punishment, a culpability of malkut. Okay. Sarat srita achat al chamisha metim. What if a person, he had 5 people that passed away, not Iranians, but 5 people that passed away, and he was soret once in anger or in anguish over all 5. Or chamesh sritot al met achat. Or what if he tore his flesh 5 times in anguish over one person? Chayav al kol achat ve'achat. He would get malkut for each and every one of those. Now that's fascinating. When you guys torn the skin 5 times over one person, that I kind of understand, because the Torah said not to do it, and then you did it 5 times for that person. That's 5 separate actions that I could understand. But the idea that a person could be sarat srita achat, that he tore his skin one time, that one action, if it's 4 or 5 people, should be considered to be 5 malkut, is a much bigger chidush. Now, once we already saw the idea that a person could get multiple punishments of malkut for one action, so we already know that this is a possibility, right? We talked about a case of bugs. So the guy ate, how many bugs did he? He ate the one bug. But since the Torah in that pasuk said it's asur, and that pasuk said it's asur, so I've transgressed 5 different transgressions. Once the Torah says you can't tear your skin for a dead person, so I tore it for this one, but I also did it for this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. So what do I have here? I have 5 different scenarios of srita al hamet. So that's a more difficult thing to understand, but still we already have experienced that concept of multiple malkut for one action.
Guy drives in the car while outside, is it multiple sins?
So yeah, you could have multiple sins, but the idea of having multiple, you can't have multiple, it's not like, in the American justice system, there's this idea that they sentence you to 12 life sentences. You're not going to live 12 life sentences. So what does that even mean? It doesn't really mean anything, right? With malkut, either there's 5 times the isur of malkut, or there isn't, yeah? But you would have the averot, you would definitely have.
Well, it's one.
You could have one avon, one transgression that could be over on many different things. Says the Gemara, another example of this idea where it's not a simple or straightforward, obviously one isur which equals one malkut. What would that be? Al harosh shtaim. What happens if a person he cuts off the peot? He could get 2 malkut penalties. Achat mikan, akat mikan. What did he do? Let's say he made over here, he had this hair all only the top, and he shaved around the whole bottom. So even though it's one act of shaving the bottom, right? But there's a pe'ah over here and a pe'ah over here. One might have thought that the pe'at harosh is this, and together it's one. And the Mishnah is teaching us that's the chidush, that there's 2 for that action. Achat mikan ve'achat mikan. Ala zakan. On the beard, person has the beard. How much does a person wind up getting? And we'll see. Sorry, Exactly. So you have, as we mentioned, high, low, and then the bottom. So al zakan, if a person does the zakan, he winds up to getting 5 malkut. Shtayim mikan, 2 here and 2 here. Ve'achat milmata. Rabbi Eliezer omer, im nitelo kulan ke'achat, eno chayav el achat. If he went like this, in one shot, okay? So it was one act, so to speak, of shaving, if you will. Then eno chayav el achat, he could only have 1 malkut penalty. And we'll have to see exactly what is the logic of Rabbi Eliezer. He did 5 sins. Who cares if he did it in one action? Also, what would it mean one action? If I started over here, is this now a second action, a single action, because I didn't stop the blade? What makes and what constitutes a single action? We're already going to have to see when we get into it a little bit deeper. Okay?
The question you were saying that if you do the single action around the back, it's 2 peyot and it's 2 sins. And if you do one like this, which includes the 2 peyot, it's only 1 sin.
No, one would imagine that Rabbi Eliezer would also hold it. That's 1. The Gemara says that this, around, is 2. Then the Gemara says if you do zakan, 5. Rabbi Eliezer comes along and says if you did it in 1, it's only 1. So he would probably say 1 around the thing. The only logic that you might have with Rabbi Eliezer with regard to the 2 peyot as opposed to the beard is that in the process of doing the beard from here all the way to here, the only thing you've shaved is isur. If I went like this all the way around, all of this is mutar. How could you call this and this one action if in between was mutar? So maybe Rabbi Eliezer would only argue on the second case and not on the first case.
Larry Silverstein, and was it 2?
Larry Silverstein, Joe Carey, exactly. 2 or 1 terrorist attacks. Yes.
Is between here and here mutar, or is it also?
So it's 1, 2, right? So it's up here, the higher part of the peot.
Without bone?
Down over here. All of this is pe'ah, yeah. And then again 1, 2, and then the bottom over here as well as the zakan. Okay? Now, we now continue and say when we're talking about that a person is shaving his beard, when is a person chayav? Why are we not getting malkut every day when we shave? Because eno chayav ad sheyetlenu b'tar, until you take it off with a razor. Rabbi Eliezer says afilu liketo b'malket o berehitni, even if he took it off b'malket u berehitni. So there's 2 different examples. That the Gemara gives that are alternates to the possibility of taking off what's it called, the pe'at harosh. The Tanakh Hama said that the only thing that you could use is a razor, but Rabbi Eliezer includes other tools that are not razors. Now here's a question: who cares what the name of the tool is? Ultimately, what is it? It's a sharpened piece of whatever, and that's cutting the hair. So why is there an idea that the Tanakh Hama says Achitlenu betar, and Rabbi Eliezer is saying even if you took it belaketu berehitni, which means that the Tanakh Hama holds that if you use these alternate tools, which were not designed for shaving, they were used for carpentry, right? That you would be patur. Okay, what's the reason? So we'll have to come across and explain what exactly that means.
Would Rabbi Eliezer hold that if you use an electric shaver, that would be type of tool?
Well, we'll see in a minute. Okay, we'll see in a minute if that's what the machloket is. All right. So one of them is the malaket and the rehitni, as we said, are 2 different the tools that they use for woodworking, right? But the other opinion, the Tanakh Hama said only betar. The question of an electric shaver is actually going to be dependent in how we understand this idea in this machloket. So we'll see. It's going to come back around and boomerang. Okay. Says the Gemara. Let's start with the beginning. Tana Rabbanan, that we learned in the Braita. Lo yikrechu korcha, a person's not allowed to make a bald spot for excessive mourning. Yachol afilu karach arba v'chamesh kirichot. I might think that if a person made 4 or 5 spots, okay, lo yeh chayav el achat, that there's only 1 isur, right? Why? Because you can't go bald. So if I made this part bald and this part bald and that part bald, I would think that there's only one. Talmud lomar korcha. Torah therefore says, not karachat, which means the person's entirely bald, but korcha means a bald spot. So therefore, if a person made 4 or 5 different bald spots by pulling out hair in mourning over here, that would also be considered a separate isur. Lechayev al kol korcha vekorcha, to obligate and to punish the person with malkut for each one of the bald spots. Birosham matamud lomar. What does the pasuk mean when it says lo yikrechu korcha birosham? They should not tear out hair, make bald spots on their head. Matu modomar lefi since it says lo titgodedu v'lo tasimu korcha ben enechem lamed, since it says that a person should not tear their flesh and that they should not make a bald spot between ben enechem, between your eyes. Yachol lo yechayav ela al ben ha'einayim bilvad. I would think that only isur is dafka between one's eyes. Okay? Now it's interesting because there's 2 ways of interpreting what it means to put a bald spot between your eyes. One pshat would mean where you shaved your unibrow. Right? You pulled out the hair between your eyes. And the other idea would be in the hair that is in the equal part of your eyes. Where do we have this exact conversation? Exactly. The Karaites learned that you put tefillin ben enecha. They would put their tefillin smack here, middle of their eyes. Okay? The Chachamim have unibrow. But the Chachamim explained, no, it means ben enecha, up and above. But in either case, when it says ben einayim over there, I might think that that's specific. So what does the pasuk do by saying birosham? It comes to tell you that the entire head is asur, and you'd get malkut for making the bald spot anywhere out of excessive or intense mourning. Says the Gemara, "Menayin larabot kol harosh Talmud lomar birosham larabot kol harosh ve'en li ela bekohanim." So in that case, right, that's only with regards to kohanim, because the case of lo titgodedu, that's speaking about where there's kohanim. So shiriba v'hen hakatuv mitzvot yeterot. So if the pasuk tells us this halacha with regards to kohanim, now kohanim have many mitzvot that are only applicable to them, that are added on over and above the 613 that all other Jews have. So if I told you a mitzvah which was mentioned in the context of a kohen, one would not be able to extrapolate that was a mitzvah that applies to all Jews. Why? Since there are other mitzvot that only apply to kohanim. So if the Torah told you a mitzvah, when it's talking to you about kohanim, you'd have to assume that the minimal is true, the lowest common denominator, which would mean that it's asur for kohanim, but not for a regular Jew, a Yisrael or a Levi, Yisrael minayin. So therefore, how do I know that Yisrael is also obligated? Ne'emar kan korcha. It says over here korcha, right? V'ne'emar lehalan korcha, and it says over there korcha, right? And each time that we see korcha, so we have a gzera shava. And what's the gzera shava? Ma lahalan chayav al kol korcha vekorcha. Just like over there, you'd be obligated on each and every specific balding of the head. V'chayav al harosh ben keben ha'einayim, and you're obligated on the head, just like between the eyes. Afkan, also over here, chayav al kol korcha ukorcha. You also would be obligated for each and every bald spot. V'chayav al harosh keben ha'einayim. You also be obligated on the head, just like between the eyes. Okay. Now let's just take a look for 1 second. I want to show you the pisukim inside. You see in the inner column, lo yikrechu korcha berosham, pa'ad zekanam lo yegalechu, ubibsaram lo yisutu saratet. So that's the pasuk in Vayikra. The second pasuk, that pasuk is talking about the kohanim. The second pasuk is talking about Israel. And what does it say? Panim atem Hashem Elokechem lo titgodelu v'lo tasimu korcha ben enechem lamet. You can't tear your skin or make a bald spot between your eyes. Since it says korcha in both pasukim, even though the first pasuk is referring to kohanim, but korcha tells you that when I told you, i.e. Israel, you cannot place a korcha, a bald spot, I'm letting you use the gzera shava to interpret what korcha meant, relying on what the definition is by kohen. By kohen, what does it say? It says, number 1, birosham, which tells you that ben enechem is not specific. And it also tells you, yikrechu korcha. The second time it says, lo tasimu korcha, which is one statement. So I might have thought that was the whole head. So the pasuk is telling you, no, yikrechu korcha. We learn from over there that you get for each time you go bald, you make yourself bald. So also over here, that will be the same case. Finally, the last limud that we learn, and just like over there, the second pasuk, you see the first pasuk, it just tells you that they can't tear their skin or rip their hair, but it doesn't tell you that was over someone's death, that it was a story specifically written or a mitzvah specifically written in the context of excessive mourning. It just says you can't rip your hair out and you can't tear your skin. So we learn the first two halachot from Kohen to Israel, i.e. not just between the eyes, and i.e. that there's not just one isur for the whole head. Each time you pull hair out and there's a bald spot, you hayav on that bald spot separately, even 4 or 5 times. We learn that from Kohen to Israel, and we learn the reverse way. It's a two-way street, the Gezerah Shava. We learn that this scenario of the Kohen is referring to the scenario of when it's done in mourning because of the pasuk by Israel, which says, lamet, dafka, specifically when it's done over mourning for someone who has died. Gemara continues. By the way, just to point this out, what if the person's act of mourning is not about someone who's died, but it's an act of mourning? We never saw that that's asur. So in other words, let's say someone's tearing their hair out because they went bankrupt. Or let's say someone's tearing their hair out because someone's very ill.
Excessive mourning.
But that you could excessively mourn a bankruptcy. You have people during the stock market crash in the 20s that they committed suicide, right? So that was excessive mourning over losing money or honor. Most cases there was more about honor and dignity than about the money that they lost. But the point is, right, that what we're seeing here is that it's dafka lemit. If a person is mourning, what happens if a person is mourning the Beit HaMikdash? Pulls hair out. Also, it doesn't say, it says lemit. And now we're learning that as a Gezerah Shava to both Pesukim to tell you that both situations are only, whether it's Yisrael or a Kohen, only the Isur that you get Malkut for tearing out hair or for tearing skin is dafka over a mit. Now let's continue. You just said to me before that if you tear your hair out 4 or 5 times, you make bald spots. What's, out of mourning? You're obligated 5 times. What's the case? If you did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each time, and 5 times, the witnesses said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. They warned him that it's asur, that he's going to get malkut. Pshita. Obviously, that's the case that you'll get malkut, right? Because it was 5 different actions, and each time you had hatra'ah, you were warned, and you did it anyway. And we know what the halakha is. But
4 or 5. Why do we keep saying that?
that's a language that we use all the time. Yeah. The idea we say 4 or 5 is something we use many, many times throughout Shas. It indicates a multiplicity of times, right? Okay. So, but my point is, it's not specifically 4 or 5. Okay. Each act is a separate act with a separate warning. So of course you get separate malkut. So what is the chidush of 4 or 5 that you would get 4 or 5 obligation that would require a separate pasuk to tell us this chidush? Ela bechada hatra. Maybe the answer is that you got 1 warning and then did 4 or 5 bald spots. Okay. Mi mechayev, the Gemara asks, is that the case? Would you be obligated for 4 different or 5 different actions if you got 1 hatra'ah? Is that the case? V'hatena, and didn't we learn, the Mishnah says, Nazir shaya shoteh yain kol hayom. Let's say you had a Nazir, the guy is asur. What is he asur from doing? He's not allowed to cut his hair, he's not allowed to become tameh, and he's not allowed to drink wine. Let's say you have a Nazir who's binging. The guy's drinking wine all day long. Nazir shaya shoteh yain kol hayom. Eno chayav ela achat. He gets 1 act of 1 malkut for the isur of drinking wine, even though he drank many times. Amrulo al tishteh, they told him, don't drink, don't drink, don't drink, don't drink. The pasuk says, v'hu shoteh, and each time he drinks, chayav al kol achat ve'achat. He's obligated on each time that they warned him. So if he's drinking all day and they told him don't drink 50 times, he is obligated 50 sets of malkut, right? So therefore, if you have, what do we learn from Nazir? That if you did 1 hatra'ah and the person transgressed repeatedly on that one warning, how many malkut would you get? One. So there can't be that the chidush of this case of korcha 4 or 5 times getting 4 or 5 malkut is in a case where you only had one hatra. Gemara says, lo tzricha, no. We brought this example of the pasuk of learning korcha, yikrachu korcha. What do we learn it for? Lo tzricha, tisach chamesh etzbaotav nasa. The case is a person took the nair is the modern day version of it, but they took the cream that burns, what's it called? It burns the hair off. Sorry? Depilatory. They took the cream and they put the cream on, it's something that they used. They took the cream and they put the cream on the face. He put on his 5 fingers, and he put it in one shot. So he stuck his hand into the cream and then he went like this. What happens now? In 1 second, he has 5 different bald spots. And he put them down in one shot. Since I warned you before you put it down, you in one shot did 5 actions of yikrachu korcha. So a person in that case would get 5 acts of 5 punishment of malkuts, because each one of them would be considered underneath that initial warning of malkut.
Korah with the cream, the whole body was shaved. It's not necessarily them shaving over here.
I don't think it was with cream with them. I think there was that they passed a razor on their head.
So they didn't have that.
No, there was no isur from them because there was a specific command from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? Says the Gemara, so how big is this size? How big does a bald spot have to be in order for it to be chayav? In this case, Rav Huna says, so it has to be that there's so much hair missing that you're actually able to see the scalp. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, Kigris. No, it's the size of a bean. Okay? Now this is really interesting. I'll tell you why. Let's say, as an example, I wanted to make a bald spot over here. How much hair would I need to rip out in order to make a bald spot over here? Large amount. Let's say I have a little bit less hair over here. I ripped out 4 hairs from a spot which the scalp is already more visible. A small amount would already make you hayav. So I think perhaps the reason why Rabbi Shimon is giving an actual size, the size of a gris, is because it turns out that, and according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, the amount of hair that would require in order to be able to be over it kind of goes up and down depending on where you did it on your head. Now let me just say this: it's not that, to me, is not really the source of the problem here, because I'll give you another example. We know that there's an isur, a chayav mitah, if a person causes a black and blue mark on their father. Okay, let's say I punch my father and he's making a muscle over here. Is he getting a black and blue mark? No. Let's say I take the area of the skin, which is the most sensitive, the inner thigh, right? And I punch him over there. That's going to be black and blue mark. It's going to bruise much more easily. If I punch the person over here by his bone on the face is actually the place where you bleed the easiest and the most, right? That's why boxers, you see, when they get punched, they're huge, their lips, etc. Everything. Why? Because it's being pressed up directly against the flat part of the skull, and there's no place for it to go. You're talking about biting his whole ear off with Mike Tyson.
3 weeks ago, when I sliced my ear.
Oh, when you slice your ear. The amount of blood on facial injuries is enormous. So would one say, it's not that's not even because in this case it's harder to get blood to come out. In this case it's easier to get blood to come out. It doesn't make a difference how hard or easy it is. The isur is for there to be a chabura. So whatever it takes in order for you to get there, that's what it takes in order for you to get there, right? So I'm not bothered by the fact that in one place yikrachu korcha would require a smaller amount of physical strands of hair, and another place there would be more amounts because that would be the isur. What bothers me is that in order for a person to be able to know that, it's very difficult to see your own head, right? So there might be a scenario where the person is not liable for malkut because he didn't realize that by pulling out just a few strands of hair that's already makes his scalp visible over there. You need to know, I can only see where I have less hair if I'm actually looking at this video, right, which is now on YouTube, okay? And now I can say, don't worry, I'm going to go to Turkey when this is all over, we'll figure it all out, right? I wonder, by the way, if imagine a guy does Yikrhu Korcha, maybe his teshuvah is that he goes to Turkey and he puts it back. Okay, the point either way is that there's a machloket between the two shitot. Now, it turns out, why is the Gemara actually bringing this? The Gemara, I believe, is bringing this as an outcome to the Gemara that we just brought. Because what did we just say? We just said that the scenario within which a person can get 5 times Malkut is when he sticks his fingers into the cream, and in one shot, he does 5 things. Now, the space of a bald spot would have to be, according to Rabbi Shimon, right, the size of a bean. That idea that you could do it, and would really only work according to the smaller shiur, which is Rabbi Eliezer, right? Rabbi Shimon, huh? No, that's only with 1 warning and 1 action. So if I did this, that was the Gemara's case. The Gemara's case over there is where he has separate drinks, and that's why he needs separate warnings. But as an example, in this case, all 5 actions are happening at the same time. So if I do 5 actions simultaneously, okay, but with 1 warning, then I would be obligated 5 malkut. It's just not possible to drink twice at the same time, right? So we don't have a comparative case. Here's an example. Let's say I have my father and my mother, and I have a stick, and they tell me, don't hit your parents, hayav mitah, and I hit him. In the same action, I hit both of them. How many times, how many averot would I have done, and how many would I have had hatra on both of them? Because the same action, which does 2, was given a hatra at the same time. Okay? So that would be the scenario that would be domeh, that would be compared with regards to korcha. So the Gemara continues. Kitanai. This machloket is already a machloket of Tanaim before this machloket that you're bringing down for us between the scalp being visible and the size of a grease, the size of a bean. Kamashul korcha, says the Braita, what is the size of korcha? Kigris, the size of a bean. Acherim omrim, others say, kidesh yireh mirosho, that the skin of the head is actually seen. So you see already that this machloket that you're bringing down already has precedent in a Braita beforehand. The Gemara continues. Now there's another shiur that would include it as well. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva, Yehuda bar Chaviva taught, pligi bat tlata tanai. There's 3 different opinions. Chada makigris, one says bean, like we mentioned. Chada makidei shir er merosho, one says that you have to be able to see the scalp. Chada ma omer, and the last one says b'shtei se'arot, with 2 hairs. The pulling of 2 hairs is already enough. So if the person just pulls his hair in frustration, and 2 hairs come out, with hatra, obviously, that would already be chayav. V'ika demapik shtei sarot umayal b'kadasha. There are some that hold, right? They never had this girsa, this version where it said 2 hairs. What did they do instead? They put in ka'adasha, which is a lentil. A lentil is a larger size than a grease, and therefore that opinion was larger than grease, but obviously nowhere near the strictness of the opinion being even 2 hairs. Very, very difficult to understand 2 hairs being the opinion. Because the word is korcha, which literally means bald. Who would ever associate the removal of 2 hairs as being bald? Right, no one would ever say, I made myself bald if they pulled 2 hairs out. Right? Okay. Today in shiur, I pulled out 1 hair to make a point. And I was in the shiur, in my ladies' shiur. Imagine if I would have pulled, I was 1 away from being bald, from korcha, obviously. Not the isur. The isur is only, as we said, lamet. But it's a very hard opinion. And maybe that's why the Amoraim didn't like this idea of shtei sarot. V'simanech, how will you remember this? Baheret kegris, u'michya b'ka'adasha. We have a famous Mishnah when it comes to negaim. In the case of negaim, in the case of tzarat, we were always trying to figure out how big is the size of the tzarat in order for the person to have to become sequestered in the story of tzarat. And the pasuk over there says, baheret, if you have a baheret, which is a white blemish of tzarat, that would be the size as kigris, and umichya, and the other kind of a mark for a metzora, where the skin starts to look like it's healthy inside of the skin that's dying. Okay, the case of michya the shiur is kadasha. So if you want to remember the two opinions that are not a bald spot, which is the one you'd remember because the word is korcha, how would you remember what those two sizes are? You would remember the famous saying in Negaim, which might be a little bit less famous in our day, but the famous saying was baheret kegris and michya ka'adasha. Let's continue. The Gemara says as follows: Tana, we learned hanotel melo pi hazug b'Shabbat. If someone takes, okay, pi hazug is the top of a scissors. It's hard to understand exactly what that means. Where is there a top of a scissors? But the top of a scissors on Shabbat, hayav. He's already obligated on Shabbat if they cut their hair on Shabbat. And where is the isur? What's the isur of cutting hair on Shabbat? Okay, there's multiple isurim, but the one that we're going to work with is gozez. Okay, which in the time of the Mishkan, when did they use? Shearing. When did they use that? When they were gathering the wool to be able to make the elements, either the clothing of the Kohanim or the yiriot or the curtains that they would need to build the Mishkan, they had to shear the wool. So giziza, what's the minimum amount of giziza? When the person cuts at the end of the scissor, just the top of the scissor, and that was already enough. The kama melo pi hazug, what does that mean? The top of the scissors? I mean, that seems like a really vague idea. Amar Rav Yehuda says, shitaim, 2 hairs. Now, let me just explain why this is very important. In halacha on Shabbat, one of the reasons why they forbid people to brush their hair on Shabbat with a tight comb is because any tight comb, you know those round ones that they use to style your hair so the bristles are very close together. If you have a very tightly bristled brush, okay, the odds are that it will pull hair out. And I always say this to people, they're like, oh, come on. I said, really? Look in the brush. What happened? Were you angry brushing one day? Right? There's hairs in the brush. How'd the hairs get in the brush? If you have a hair, a comb or a brush that has very widely placed bristles, so then oftentimes it's not obvious that it will pull out hair. And then, by the way, if hair got pulled out by a brush like that, that's not considered like you did it on purpose. That's an onus. It might happen, it might not happen. How does it happen if it's so wide apart? Because sometimes the hair underneath, well, you can't even see. You have millions of hairs, okay? The hair might be knotted. If 2 hairs are knotted together, even if you pull with a widely bristled brush, it's still going to yank out the hairs. And the odds are you might get a BOGO. You might get a buy one, get one free, because if they're tied together and that's what it got caught on, it will pull 2 hairs out from the root. Okay? So, but with regards to halachot Shabbat, we would not be obligated in such a case. But in a tightly bristled brush, many opinions say that that's considered a psik resha. It's impossible to brush your hair without pulling out hair in that kind of a brush. So then obviously that would be different. Obviously that also depends on a person's hair. Let's say, as an example, I ran a bristled brush like that, tightly bristled through my little scrubble on my face. Nothing's coming out. Some people, that's what they have on the top of their head. They have only like stubble. If the person used a brush like that on stubble, nothing's going to happen, right? If you used it, if you have long flowing locks, or if a woman has long hair where automatically their hair is always knotted, so then even a hairbrush that's a little bit wider could be a problem. A person needs to understand the realities on the ground. Ask the Gemara, this last, we're going to actually, no, we'll continue from here because this is the next piece. We'll continue from here, Be'ezrat Hashem, at our next class. I want to wish you all, of course, a Shana Tova M'vorechet. Our next class, as Rosh Hashanah is tomorrow night, our next class is not going to be on Thursday. Our next class will probably be Be'ezrat Hashem Sha'at Tova Mutzlachat on Sunday. Now, Sunday is a Ta'anit. So you guys will have to let me know if you'd rather do the learning in the evening or if you'd rather do the learning, because we could do the learning in the morning if you're going to go to work late. Either way, you'll let me know in the group. Okay? Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.